Welcome to the 2023 Significance Lecture at the RSS Conference. I'm Anna Britton, the editor of Significance magazine, and I want to thank you very much for joining us for this lecture, whether you're here in the room in Harrogate or watching us online at a later date. It's my great pleasure to introduce today our speaker, Mihaela van der Schaar. After 13 years at the University of California, Los Angeles, Mihaela moved to the UK, initially to the University of Oxford, and she's been a fellow at the Turing Institute since 2016. In addition, she has been the John Humphrey Plummer Professor of Machine Learning, Artificial Intelligence and Medicine at the University of Cambridge since 2018, where she leads the Van der Schaar Lab, a research team focused on breakthroughs in machine learning to save lives and revolutionize medicine. She is also founder and director of the Cambridge Centre for AI in Medicine. Mihaela is a fellow of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers and has received numerous awards, including the Owen Prize on Preventative Medicine from the University of Cambridge in 2018. She is personally credited as inventor on 35 US patents, has made over 45 contributions to international standards, and has published more than 600 papers and authored several books and book chapters. In 2019, a Nesta report determined that Mihaela was the most cited female AI researcher in the UK. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. There are mics, there are 4 mics down here, so when the time comes, please make your way to one of those. But for now, please welcome Mihaela van der Schaar.
Thank you, Anna, for the kind introduction. It's really a great pleasure to be here today. When I received this invitation, I need to say I was delighted, but also a little bit scared. And the reason behind that is that often the two communities of statistics and machine learning like to trash each other. And I thought me as a machine learner coming to talk to a majority of audience being statisticians is going to be like entering a lion's den. And it is relatively easy to come up with such stereotypes. And often we are using them, but I think that it is unhelpful. So what I'm going to try to do today is to hopefully convince you, if you are not already convinced, that actually our real enemy, a tough enemy, is the complexity of the real world and solving problems in this real world. And because we have complementarity in skills, we are fantastic partners to join forces to solve real-world problems and conquer our common enemy. I said that I'm a machine learner, but the reality is that I am an engineer by training, and for some time in my life I also was an economist that published papers in economics journals. And more recently, I think people call me a computer scientist. The reality is I've done machine learning for a long time, and I'm not fitting very well in any such box. And the reason I don't is I'd like to be defined not by the discipline I have started my career on, but rather what I'm trying to really solve, which is real-world problems. And together with brilliant students, over the past 20 years, we have worked on numerous topics: smart grids, transportation, finance, economics, energy grids, and more recently, medicine and healthcare, as well as education. And I really believe that as a researcher, solving these complex human-centric problems is our biggest task. I have composed in this process a research team of PhD students and postdocs that come from very diverse fields. Some are mathematicians, some are applied mathematicians, some are statisticians, some are computer scientists, some are engineers, some are economists, and some are physicists. As a matter of fact, 1/3 of my lab has had an undergraduate degree in statistics. So we are very diverse, and we believe that this diversity is enabling us to solve complex problems. So what I'm going to try to do today is to show to you how in our lab have joined forces with each other to really address some of the challenges that we have, and how this complementarity of skills has empowered us. So I'm going to show to you 4 quite different ways on how we join forces together to solve such problems. And I'm going at times to use 2 pictograms, a statistics pictogram and a machine learning pictogram, to highlight whether an idea comes from a field or another, or the 2 ideas have blended together into something different, something joined. I'm going to start with the most easy of them, which is something that I'm going to call machine learning flex modeler, where the idea is to use machine learning and more generally deep learning techniques to relax assumptions that are often made in statistics and improve modeling performance. As I mentioned, I'm a relatively newcomer. I'm only working in machine learning for healthcare for the last 8 years. But prior to that, I've done other things. Yet when I moved to this area, even prior to me moving to Oxford, I immediately discovered, of course, Cox regressions, which are, of course, amazing and inspiring. So immediately I started to think, can we make the assumptions associated with such models more, can we do away with some of the assumptions? And can we add additional flexibility? And of course, very fast, I discovered that people have already done so. So I wondered, can we even do better? So in quite of a frenzy in my lab, we tried to look at the beautiful work of time-to-event analysis and survival analysis with different hats. And we modeled survival analysis with competing risk as a multitask machine learning problem, where we made different assumptions and we used different types of machine learning algorithms, whether it's Gaussian processes, whether it's tree-based Bayesian mixture models, or the dark world of deep learning. And we came up with different methods. Here are just 3 of the earlier ones. Since then, many more have come. And a question that comes to mind, and I'm going to address later, how to choose among these different methods. We can keep developing methods more and more flexible and with different types of assumptions, but how to choose among them? I'm going to return to that question a little later. But first, I'm going to say that as soon as I started this and starting to apply these methods to real-world problems, for instance, in medicine, I started to be interested in doing time-to-event analysis, survival analysis, on the basis of longitudinal data. So we have measurements that are taken over time, and we have events of interest and censoring. And what we would like to do is, on the basis of this longitudinal data, to predict different events of interest and do time-to-event analysis for these different competing risks. It's interesting because usually I do not talk to a community of statisticians. I talk to people in machine learning. And people in machine learning fall asleep when they hear the word survival analysis, because they wrongly think that time-to-event analysis and survival analysis is something that only pertains to medicine. But as you know much better than us, this is something that is very ubiquitous. And it's important, not only in healthcare, but also in finance, in smart cities, in energy grids. So I often go to a machine learning conference and try to convince people to look at the important field of survival analysis. Of course, solutions for dealing with dynamic time series data and survival analysis on the basis of such data exist. And we have landmarking, we have joint models, and we also have hidden Markov models. And since I'm keen to solve real-world problems, I experimented with all of them. And an early love for more than 10 years now was hidden Markov models. And we built generations of new methods on top of hidden Markov models, whether looking at hidden semi-Markov model, hidden absorbing semi-Markov models, and many others. And all these techniques are, if you like, appertaining to the field of statistics. But what you also see very often, and this is true from finance to medicine, is that history at times matter. And the Markovian assumption, even when relaxed, is actually detrimental to model a variety of problems. For instance, in medicine, the order of events, the duration of events matters, but also the entire history of such events matters. Also, we would like to move from a one-size-fits-all representation of the data to a personalized one. So a question that comes to mind is, could we use the powerful world of deep learning to address these challenges? And indeed, a lot of dynamic and recurrent models exist in machine learning, from recurrent neural networks to convolutional neural networks and dilated neural networks to the world of transformers, which has been the workhorse of ChatGPT and the advances on natural language processing. But there is a problem with this. While these methods are very powerful, they are not solving a dynamic time-to-event analysis. They are solving a classification problem. So a lot of the focus of machine learners is, for instance, on natural language processing, where, for instance, the focus will be to predict the next word. But here we don't want to predict the next biomarker. That is quite uninteresting. We want to use all the history of past biomarkers to do time-to-event analysis. And these machine learning methods that I described in the previous slide are incapable to do so. So we are looking again at the world of statistics, because here you have already provided solutions and way of thinking about that. So a question comes, can we combine these two ways of thinking? And I'm going to show to you the simplest way possible, and I'm going to move from there. First time we tried to put these two ideas together in a method that we call dynamic deep hit. We took a recurrent neural network with attention, and more recently people have improved on this architecture and put transformer networks here or other networks. And it continues to be a multitask architecture because we have for every task a different event. So these are different competing events of interest. For instance, a particular type of heart failure and, for instance, breast cancer. And we wanted to optimize this for a survival analysis task rather than a prediction task. What do machine learners do in such a case? They define a loss function. And the loss function is a combination of statistics ideas and machine learning ideas. The way in which in machine learning we train these neural networks is with the green loss highlighted here, which is a step-ahead prediction, which you would do when you predict the next biomarker. But as I mentioned, this does do nothing to the world of survival analysis. There, we have two losses that come from statistics, which are, of course, inspired by methods such as concordance indexes and so on. And they measure two different things. The first measures the log likelihood of the time-to-event distribution, and the second one is a ranking loss. So these are two loss functions that are inspired by cumulative incidence function, would now play a role together with the machine learning loss in training the network that I described. So a first lesson to learn here is that if you want as a statistician tomorrow to become a machine learner, it's very easy for you, the statisticians. It's even easier for you than for machine learners to come to your world. Why? You can take your favorite machine learning method that has been defined and define a loss that comes from statistics that's appropriate to the problem of interest. And already you are going to do better than the machine learning world. Now, this is a very simple idea, and we put it together quite fast, but already makes a real-world impact. Together with Vincent Granapaglasam, who is the professor of urology in Cambridge and a pioneer in prostate cancer, we have used this dynamic deep hit to survey in a personalized way patients who have prostate cancer. And it is well known that patients with prostate cancer may either evolve very slowly, and prostate cancer will not affect their life, or this disease can be very aggressive and hence needs to be intervened early. Currently, we have surveillance techniques that are of the form one size fits all, and what dynamic deep hit allows for is to do personalized surveillance. And we are currently testing this in the Cambridge University Hospital. And if you want to see a video of Vincent talking about this technology, it can be found on our website. But this is a very kind of dumb combination, very simple and hopefully inspiring, but very dumb combination of machine learning and statistic methods. So we wanted to think whether we can really more fundamentally combine statistics and machine learning to conquer time. Since I'm a big lover of hidden Markov models, and they have important strengths, inclusively the fact that they are interpretable because this underlying hidden state of represents trajectory of disease, which can be made interpretable for clinicians. But as I mentioned, has limitations in terms of the assumptions made with respect to past history. Conversely, methods such as recurrent neural networks or transformers are uninterpretable, but they are very flexible in taking into consideration entire histories and allowing for personalization. So how did we put these two things together? In a method called Attentive state space models, we created a superset of these two models, which is a general and versatile deep probabilistic model that captures the advantages of both. It maintains the probabilistic structure of hidden Markov models in the sense that we still have now interpretable hidden states, but the state dynamics are modeled now with a recurrent neural network, which is a more powerful way of modeling trajectories and allows also for non-stationarity. So by putting these two things together, a blended model appears, which is a very powerful one, and a more powerful one even than any machine learning model, because it allows now to have attention on the different states, and unlike Markov models, allows an entire past history to be considered. And you see that in here. You also can, in a very easy way, incorporate static features. So this is a scenario where the two worlds are really combined at a more fundamental level. And what I like about this technique is that it becomes a generalization of many models, some in statistics, some in signal processing, some in machine learning. And the reason this is good is you can learn from data what is really needed and what assumptions is the underlying data following. So it's a powerful way to think jointly about this world of time series. But what about treatments? I talked about predictions, but ideally we would like to determine interventions as well. We would like to determine how to treat, when to give treatment, and when to stop treatment. And this is, of course, not a prediction problem, but rather a causal effect inference problem. And again, for you, the world of statistics, I don't need to say anything, but since usually I give this to a community of machine learners, I need again to highlight the word effect and treatment effect, and to point out that this is not something that's only useful in medicine, but it is useful in finance, in smart grids, in transportation system. It is something very general and very important. So I'm going to use a medical example because most of my work nowadays is in this area, but as I mentioned, this is of course very general. So what we would like to do is to use observational data, longitudinal observational data that contains time-dependent features, time-dependent treatments, and some static variables, which could be, for instance, genetic information or other information. And this represents the history of the patient, which is often recorded in electronic health records. And what we would like to do is to use such observational data that is biased and has confounders, has hidden confounders, to issue predictions about what would happen to a patient in the future and what type of treatments we should apply and when. There are many challenges associated with this. One of the big challenges is the fact that we only observe the factuals in the data. We do not observe counterfactuals. So the history just contains the actions that were actually given to this patient and the outcome. We do not observe what would have happened otherwise. A big problem is that of confounding, and in time series setting, this is a huge one, because we have time-depending confounders, which are going to bias the treatment assignment in this observational data set. And what are time-dependent confounders are patient covariates, which are affected by the treatments, by the past treatments, and influence, of course, future treatments and outcomes. And just to show to you the complex world of time series confounding, you see here bias from these time-depending confounders. So again, we move from the world of prediction to the complex world of time-depending confounders. So this is a very nasty problem to solve. Fortunately, two of my favorite statisticians, Robbins and Hernan, have developed 20 years ago very powerful ways of thinking about this problem. And this is marginal structural models, where they have used inverse probability of treatment weighting to solve this problem, to formalize as well as solve this problem. I was very inspired by this work. Again, big fan of Robbins and Hernan. And we initially did something simple, a machine learning trick. What we did is we said, well, can we come up with a more flexible architecture than the marginal structural models and replace the longitudinal trajectories with recurrent neural network to model the time series data, but keep, so this is a machine learning component, but we kept the statistical component of doing inverse probability of treatment weighting. In the process, what we discovered is that both marginal structural models as well as the recurrent marginal structural models suffer from numerical instabilities and high variance for the data sets that we were using. And we tried this again and again, and we saw issues associated with this. So then we started to think again and see if we can improve on top of these methods. So we came with a completely machine learning approach, but which was very much inspired, again, by the formalism of marginal structural models. And the machine learning method that we came up with is called counterfactual recurrent network. And I will tell you a little bit about that in the next slide. So what do these CRNs do, the counterfactual recurrent networks? They estimate the counterfactual trajectories using a sequence-to-sequence architecture. We love in machine learning the sequence-to-sequence architectures because they have shown to be very powerful. For instance, the early successes of deep learning in translation, where people change between, for instance, English and Chinese or English and French, came through such sequence-to-sequence models where you move from one language to another. In a similar way, we consider the sequence prior to the current intervention to be the past language, and if we want to translate, given different types of interventions at different moments in time, we are going to have new languages that are going to be triggered by these interventions. But this, as I like to tell my machine learning colleagues, is a much harder problem than a sequence-to-sequence architecture. And this is because of dealing with counterfactuals and dealing with confounders. So what did we do to solve this problem in a complete machine learning way, rather than do inverse probability of treatment weighting? We used domain adversarial training to enable us to balance the representations of past patient trajectories. And in CRN, at every step, we create these treatment invariant representations that are able to eliminate the association between patient covariates and treatments, thereby being able to compute high-quality counterfactuals. And indeed, in a variety of experiments, initially on toy data and then on real data, we have shown that indeed this CRN method is able to do better than the original marginal structural models, the recurrent marginal structural models. And this is true both in the short run and in the long run. Since then, the whole agenda continued, and together with collaborators in the medical field, we got inspired to solve a variety of other problems. Look at continuous treatment, look at dose, look at irregular observations because the data is not regularly observed but is irregularly observed. And most recently, looking at the fact that the data is informatively observed. So we are not just taking measurements all the time, but the time of the measurements is informative about the patient trajectory as well as the treatments associated with it. And that's a sticky one, a complex one. And it may make you smile that we couldn't solve it for now in any other way than going back to inverse probability of treatment weighting. So it's still a problem that requires some brilliant minds, my guess is from statistics, to solve this. Oh, sorry. But as you can see, all my work, even though I'm a machine learner, has been heavily in the camp of statistics. It is a statistical framework on the basis of which I have built. And as a matter of fact, most of my work fits into the Neymar-Rubin framework. So it is only normal that the second bridge I'd like to bring to your attention moves from using flexibility of deep learning to building a conceptual bridge. And the world of causality is the one that needs most this conceptual bridge in order to make a real-world impact. We know that there is a big divide between the computer science field of causality. As a matter of fact, Anna didn't mention that, but I was a professor at UCLA. Actually, I think she did mention that. And Judea Pearl was my colleague in the computer science department. And of course, Judea has his way of thinking about causality that's very different than the statistical way of thinking about causality. And there is quite a big divide in this way of thinking. So what we have started to do end of last year is to think in a much more pragmatic way on how to unify these two fields. So we invented something that we call causal deep learning, which is a way of thinking that combines these two ways of thinking from computer science and causality, from computer science and statistics, and allow building reality-centric pragmatic solutions to make a real-world impact. It will work with both plausible as well as partial causal structure. I am not a believer that we will ever have in our lifetime complete causal structure. The reality is that we only have partial knowledge about causality. This is why I have been, for a long time, a statistician from that point of view. But it's clear that in some settings we do know partial causal structure, and that needs to be incorporated into it. Also, what the statisticians have done much better, in my opinion, than the computer scientists is looking at parametric forms. It is not only that smoking causes cancer, but the entire relationships of how much smoking and how the other variables play a role is important as well. And this is not considered in the computer science framework. And finally, both these two frameworks don't talk a lot about time. So we put a manifesto paper that fortunately Judea endorsed, which is done by a computer scientist. Yarun is a PhD student in my lab, computer scientist, a mathematician, and a statistician. We put our minds together to come up with this paper, and what it tries to do is exactly that, a bridge between the ladder of causality to the world of statistics. And we try to do that in the following way. First, we introduce structures in the following way. Besides the association and complete causal structure, we introduce a rank 1.5, where we have either partial causal structure or plausible causal structure. Here I'd like again to highlight important work by Robbins more than 10 years ago, who has tried to make an initial bridge between the world of statistics and Neymar-Rubin and the world of causality as introduced by Judea Pearl. But what we do here in this rank 1.5, we go beyond and allow for more bridges to be built. This is the first component. The second component is parameters, because in the statistical world, we care a lot about parametric and non-parametric functions associated with causal effect inference, but the world of computer science usually just focuses on variables causing others and not the parametric form. So this allows an unification of thinking. And again, this is a topographic map because we care a lot about time. And time, if you like, is the x-axis here. Why is this important, we believe? First, because it will oblige these two domains to think in a much more unified way. So in our paper, we try to put together around 300 papers from the two worlds and put them into this map to show researchers, especially young researchers starting in this field of causality, that there is a common language and there is a common benefit by interacting in this common world. Also, this is very useful for practitioners. As I mentioned, I deal a lot with clinicians, and they care a lot about solving real-world problems, and depending on the assumptions they are willing to make, this bridge allows them to make the right assumptions, but also to combine methods from the two fields. And finally, as a researcher in this field, it is very confusing when a new student starts in my lab to know what has been done and what has not been done, partially because the community is published in segregated venues. So what we really hope is in this way we have a very good idea of what has been done in causality. And what is interesting, if you look at this map that we have created, is that there are many white spots. In the process of just, let's say, quarreling with each other, we leave a lot of work that needs still to happen unresolved. So I hope you take a look and engage with this bridge. Let me now go to another way of thinking, and this is going to put another hat. We often think about statistics and machine learning and which one is better. And I'd like to convince you that maybe there is a different way to think about that. And especially using a machine learning idea, automated machine learning, to enable us to understand when we need nonlinear interactions, when we don't need them, how we can combine methods together, and whether we can discover new risks for different diseases or problems and build better analytics. To highlight that, let me show to you an experiment that I've done 6-7 years ago, where we took a variety of medical data sets, all of them focused. They were curated. I'm not showing here the details, but they were all curated with clinicians, and they focused on cardiovascular disease. And what you see is different machine learning models and the Cox proportional hazard models. And what you see there is for some data sets, that's a big difference. For some data sets, it's a small difference. And the machine learning models that are best for the different data sets are very different. So the same thing is happening not only for prediction, but for imputation. So most of our data sets need imputation. And if you take a variety of machine learning models for imputation, we have done a lot of work in our lab on building new machine learning methods for imputation, but also statistical methods. Different methods are best for different data sets. So how to select among them? So since 2017, we started to take this automated machine learning approach to empower both researchers and practitioners to select in a judicious way without any, let's say, preconceived ideas, what method will be best for a particular data set. So for a practitioner or for a researcher, when we have a new curated data set, we would like to be able to apply AutoML to determine what's the best method, what's the best model, and also to identify risk factors associated with this, and also to do explanation. I'm not going to talk about explanation today, but that's a very important component together with uncertainty estimation as well. The challenge is big if you want to do risk prediction, because it's not only about doing a classification or a regression task. We also need to deal with missing data imputation, which may contain different models and may impact what follows after. So the issue of congeniality plays a very important role. The issue of feature processing as well, and that of calibration. So there is a billion choices that we can choose from, which makes the problem hard. It's a huge design space to select from the best method. So we have different models, and what's complex is that often the methods that we are using have themselves hyperparameters. So it's not that I just need to select between XGBoost and regression, but also a model such as XGBoost, for instance, or a deep learning model may have a lot of parameters to optimize from. So it's a complex model selection and hyperparameter optimization problem, but it is not an optimization problem because we do not know the answer. It is a learning problem. So what you see here is that we have numerous parameters, numerous hyperparameters, and finding this using an exhaustive search is impossible. So what we did, again, a few years back, crafted a first tool to build these clinical scores. And what you see is that not all algorithms have correlated performance. And what we try to achieve is to learn which models are similarly performing for one data set and which ones do not, and optimize the ones that are similar jointly. And note that this differs per data set. So we learn from data that, for instance, decision trees, random forest, and XGBoost are similar in performance and optimize them jointly, and they differ, for instance, than SVM and logistic regression. And this can change depending on the data set, and we learn that from data. So in this way, we were able to conquer this complex problem of multi-objective optimization. And we built autoprognosis, which is this tool for crafting scores. What I'd like to say here is that this is joint work of statistics and machine learning because many of the models that are under the hood in imputation, in classification, in calibration, come, of course, from statistics. More recently, we developed a new framework for this, and this is, again, work between my postdoc, who is a statistician by training, an engineer who is a computer scientist and a clinician, and we have a newer version, which is an open source, very robust framework that I invite you to play with, either to identify the best model or to insert your own model to it. So it is an open source software that is of high quality and can enable you at the push of a button to build scores and compare them. While I talk about classification, we also built AutoML frameworks for survival analysis, causal models, and temporal models. And last but not least, imputation. And since many of you deal with imputation, I'd like to highlight this. So what we discover is that often different methods are best for different data sets and for different missingness mechanisms. You can read more in our paper, Hyperimpute, the analysis. But what we discover is that there are very interesting insights when different methods work and why do they work. So what we did is, with Hyperimpute, we built this automated machine learning framework that is able to find the best imputation method for a problem. And you can find the package online. Now, how do we take this to practice? We have taken this over the years with clinicians to a variety of diseases, from cystic fibrosis to cardiovascular disease to breast cancer to COVID-19. As a matter of fact, we were the first machine learning group to join forces together with NHS Digital to predict something very mundane using autoprognosis, but very useful: the demand for intensive care beds and ventilators. And autoprognosis was repurposed in less than a month to do this task, because it's easy to use. I'd like to show to you how you can use this tool as a discovery and analysis tool. So can we discover new factors, and can we discover nonlinear interactions? And I'm going to use one example of cardiovascular disease, but this can be done for any problem, whether it's medicine or not. So we took UK Biobank that contains a variety of variables and covariates, and we took two types of benchmarks. One was a proportional hazard model, the other one was a clinical score, which is the Framingham score. And we considered two scenarios, either looking at the traditional known risk for cardiovascular disease, or looking at the entire UK Biobank, which at the time we did contain 473 relevant variables. And we asked two questions, which this AutoML framework of autoprognosis can do very well. We ask first, what is the modeling gain? How much do we win by moving from a Cox proportional hazard model to an AutoML framework that determines the best machine learning model or statistical model to be used, or combinations of those? and an information gain. How much do you win by introducing additional covariates? This is done, again, very, very fast. You push a button and you can do this type of analysis. And indeed, we discover a variety of new factors, especially for women. There were quite a lot of new factors, and you can take a look at this paper. But what I want to show to you is what happened in terms of performance. In terms of performance, autoprognosis was barely better than the Framingham score for the general population. The modeling gain was very limited. It is only for diabetic patients where there was a significant gain. And the significant gain came both from adding more variables, but also looking at the nonlinear interactions between these variables. So it's becoming a very interesting tool that allows us to really think comprehensively about a particular problem. At this stage, somebody can wonder, is machine learning always good when we have many, many variables? And for a long time, I thought so. Till I met Tom Callender, who is an epidemiologist from UCL, who worked with us on a paper that's just about to appear next week. With him, he took autoprognosis to ask the following, to look at lung cancer screening. And lung cancer is important because it has poor survival in the UK and is diagnosed late. And it has been shown that we could reduce significant lung cancer if we can screen earlier. The trouble with why we don't screen earlier is in the UK we have two risk models that have 19 variables. So there are regressions of 19. What is used here is two regression models, and they contain 19 variables. And this is very time consuming, so most clinicians, most GPs are not going to do that. This is also, of course, very problematic when you move to other countries which have even less resources than the UK. And what Tom has shown is something very surprising. He showed with AutoML that we can go from 19 variables and the Cox model to only 3 variables with autoprognosis, achieve the same performance. So at this stage, you may wonder, wow, so machine learning with 3 variables does so much better than Cox with 19. The answer is yes, but it's also something else that's interesting. It's interesting to see that the model that was selected and achieved this performance is a combination of regression methods. You see here logistic regression and other statistical methods being important in the AutoML pipeline that was conceived. So this is how machine learning and statistics can join forces to really enable us to deal with less variables and achieve important advances in the world of screening. Finally, I'm going to say just a very few words about data. And here, it's a different type of thinking. In the past tools, I talked about machine learning and statistics joining forces by blending each other. Here, I'm going to more or less propose to you to use machine learning to solve dirty issues with the data that you deal with. And we often hear about, I'm going to start a little bit at the higher level, we often hear about enormous leaps in AI. And it's true that we have ChatGPT, we have generative models, and we have many other advances. But the reality is that despite the hype in AI and the hype in machine learning, we still didn't solve many real-world problems. We have not transformed healthcare systems, we have not solved traffic control problems, we didn't prevent yet the next climate catastrophe or the next financial crisis, or often I like to say that as an educator, I think if a Roman schoolmaster would come in the classes we teach today, they will recognize what is happening, and that is sad. So I also believe that despite the hype, we are not just a few breakthroughs away from solving this complexity of our common enemy, the real world. So what I proposed in recent times is a paradigm shift in AI to reorient it from the hype towards solving the complexities of the real world. And I put a manifesto up there, which made me quite unpopular with many of my machine learning colleagues, and I call this the case for reality-centric AI. I hope you will take a look. But as part of that, what we try to do with reality-centric AI is to orient AI to solve real-world problems and build AI that operates effectively and accountably, given the inherent and unavoidable complexities of the real world, and also builds AI that empowers but doesn't marginalize humans. And an important point there is data, because the data we deal with is messy, biased, is costly to acquire, is limited, is incomplete, changes over time, and often, for instance, in healthcare and education, you cannot even share it with another colleague due to privacy violations. And this is a problem that not only machine learning suffers from, but also statistics. So what we introduced in 2017, and it's interesting that by now everybody talks about it, but in 2017 I had a very hard time pushing this idea, was to use synthetic data to deal with the privacy issues. So what we were proposing at the time, and by now it seems to finally get some traction, is that if you have private data that you cannot exchange with the statistics and machine learning community, you may want instead to use synthetic data. Because if you can generate privacy-preserving synthetic data, then you can share that with the machine learning and statistics community. They can develop methods which then can be returned to the original data holders without data security breaches. Since then, this is long ago, 2017, I believe we can do even more things with synthetic data. As a matter of fact, I believe synthetic data can be made to be better than real data. And the reason behind that is we can use ideas from machine learning to reduce bias in data, to deal with small sample sizes, to learn and harmonize effectively data sets that may be related conceptually but not have the same features, and finally generate forward-looking data such that we can plan for future scenarios. We talk about this into a tutorial that I gave earlier this year at AAAI, and you can find this online if you are interested. But maybe even more important is we have spent the last 1.5 years to bring together methods from the entire world of generative models, and we built the most comprehensive open source synthetic data generation and evaluation software for tabular data. And that is available to you to play with and create synthetic data sets on the basis of real data. So we solved the problem, no? Well, the reality is, how do we know that the quality of the data is any good? And actually, this is something that has bothered me for a long time. Initially, I proposed to train on synthetic and test on real, but this doesn't provide a real good assessment of the quality of data. So what we have tried to do in a first attempt is to assess how faithful is your data. And we discover very fast that this is very challenging because we cannot have a one metric point. We need to have a more comprehensive metric for synthetic data. We need to measure fidelity, diversity, and generalization. A first attempt was made, but actually this is a very hard problem. So we desperately need your help. So I hope that at least one of you in the audience would be interested to look with us at this problem of assessing the quality of synthetic data and develop good statistical measures for that. Another problem is that of fairness. And what I'd like to say here is just, I wanted to show it to you because often you may think that synthetic data is always worse. But in this case, synthetic data is actually better than real data because often data may be unfair, and that may lead to unfairness being propagated in the downstream prediction. And what we do in this work, we use synthetic data to turn it into fair data on the basis of which statistics on machine learning can be applied. And you can see that in the machine learning world, we are in a competition about good names. So decaf was what my students came up with. So there are different notions of fairness, and this problem is kind of hard. So the way in which we were able to formalize it is by bringing ideas from causality together with the work of generative models. So this decaf uses a causal perspective to provide an intuitive guideline to achieve different fairness metrics. And decaf is debiasing in an effective way the data because the local distributions are preserved. Now, let me say that this is just one idea. I really hope, again, that some of the statisticians in the room will come and help us develop even better methods. So with this, I'd like to conclude the talk, first with a call to action, to think differently about your and, I would say, our problems of solving real-world problems. I do believe that machine learning can enhance what you as statisticians are doing. I can definitely tell you that you, the statisticians, are enhancing the work that I'm doing as a machine learner. And I'm often talking to my machine learning community to advertise tools that you have developed. I'd like also to ask you to take a look at our papers, not because they are the greatest, but because quite a lot of our work comes from these two mindsets of statistics and machine learning. And if you are interested to bridge these two worlds, it may provide you with some food for thought. So I do think we are not enemies, we should be friends. And I really feel we are very natural friends and collaborators. I would not like to collaborate with another machine learner because I don't feel that they can add much to what I know. But I would be delighted to collaborate with as many statisticians I can convince. So if you are searching for a machine learning friend and you want to move from the world of statistics to the joint world of machine learning and statistics to conquer real-world problem, please drop me a line. And finally, my goal is not to build methods, but rather to bring together whatever ideas I can to solve reality-centric problems and hopefully make a difference in the real world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihaela, for that fascinating talk about building a bridge between two not-so-different worlds after all. Let's take some questions. If you have a question, please make your way to a mic. I'm also getting them digitally on here. Hello.
Hello. That was really a very good talk. I really enjoyed that. I was very interested in your love of causality and of Robinson's work, and I was fascinated when you said that one of the systems that you presented could generate good counterfactuals. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that and tell us when you cannot do that.
Thank you. This is a very good question and a tricky one because it has many, many answers. So first, let me say that I not always can generate good counterfactuals. It really depends on the data and the data that has acquired, and the type of data that we have, the amount of samples that we have, and also, importantly, if we have, especially if I do this in the longitudinal setting, I also do work in the static setting, but if I do it in the longitudinal setting, what information was captured prior to giving treatment or stopping treatment. So the quality of the data is key there. So I could talk for a long hour about this because I still feel it's an area that's in progress, but let me say the most important component currently, I think, is built on showing uncertainty estimates associated with the counterfactuals. So we took another idea that originates from the world of statistics, which is conformal prediction. And we issue in the latest work we have confidence estimates, frequentist confidence estimates associated with our estimation of these counterfactuals. So we will know what we know and what we kind of don't know. So that's one answer. The second answer is, in order to be able to estimate counterfactuals, you really want to have some form of overlap. And it's challenging because this overlap encodes at times expertise. And at certain cases, you do not have overlap because of expertise. So in the most recent work we do, we kind of improve the work of counterfactuals by looking not only as actions or these treatments as just being some type of random actions, but rather the encoding of expertise, which has in it some inherent estimation of the counterfactual. If you have thoughts about this area of causality and you come from statistics and you are interested to talk to me, please, please do.
I've got lots of questions that have come through on the app. My understanding of the technical subject content is very limited. What is a simple takeaway for me to keep in mind?
The simple takeaway to keep in mind is that if we are trying really to solve complex problems, from healthcare to finance to smart grids to education to climate, we need to engage with the real world problems and try to build techniques, no matter where they come from whatever field, whether it's mathematics, statistics, engineering, computer science, or economics, and try to think outside of the disciplines we come from and break these barriers at all costs to solve these problems. And this is easier said than done, because the reality is that if you are an academic usually, it's very difficult to break these barriers. I've had an enormous amount of good fortune that I was allowed to do that in my early career. I've published all sorts of economics papers that my engineering and computer science colleagues didn't understand and didn't like, and yet I was allowed to do that. So I'd say, despite incentives that you may have in your life, especially academic life, break them, because I think the future is in solving real-world problems, and be open to learn from other disciplines, because they have a lot to teach you.
One more. How does one get a postdoc position in your lab?
Oh, that's very good. So I would like to start by saying that it's a tricky world, the one I'm in. I'm now centered in machine learning, and I didn't used to be always a machine learning lab, but I am now. And in my lab, students unfortunately get positions very fast. So no machine learning student will want to do a postdoc. They can find almost immediately jobs in top research labs or academia. So this is fortunate if you are a statistician, because actually my current postdoc, Fergus Imrie, comes from the field of statistics. So if you are a statistician and you are interested in moving to the world of machine learning, please do apply.
There are lots more questions, but we are running out of time. I'd suggest, are you sticking around for a few minutes?
Yeah, no, for sure. Sorry for being a little too long.
If we didn't answer your question, so Delith, Christian, Chibueze, Oliver, Alice, Ivo, the rest of you, if you stick around and talk to Mihaela afterwards, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer your questions. So I'm going to thank everybody for joining us. I'm going to give huge thanks to Mihaela van der Schaar for a fantastic and inspiring talk.